Where's the $2K I send every month? Mom's all worn out. Exhausted, I respond, Did you check your mom's bank book? Huh? Bank book? Given his bewildered response, I sigh, remove my shoes, and retrieve a bank book from the living room. Here, your mom's bank book. She dropped it the last time she visited. He takes the bank book from me and checks it. His face turns pale as he looks at me. What? What's this? That's what I'm talking about. I pointed to the bank book. Besides the transfers from my account, there were deposits from another person. All deposited money was immediately transferred to another account under my mother-in-law's name. My husband sat down, weakly. He got up, looked at me, and said, We need to check with Mom. My name is Pam. I'm a 42-year-old working woman. My husband, Bob, is 3 years younger than me, and we've been married for about 2 years. We've worked at the same company for over a decade, but we've always just been colleagues. However, we once got assigned to work on a project which brought us closer together. After the project was completed, he invited me to dinner and confessed his feelings. Honestly, I'm a workaholic and I didn't have any plans on getting married. I did date when I was younger, but my work-first attitude always led to breakups. When I turned 35, I figured I was fine not getting married. Knowing all this, Bob still wanted to be with me. He even prepared a ring for what was supposed to be just a casual dinner. I was drawn to his earnestness and suggested we started dating, and so our relationship began. As we talked about family and more, I saw his kindness. He was supportive, allowing me to throw myself into work. I thought, he is the man for me, and proposed to him. The ring he had initially prepared became our wedding ring. Bob's father had disappeared one day, and his mother had raised him single-handedly. It's hard for a single, unemployed mother to find a good job. She held down several jobs just to make ends meet. When Bob got a job, his mom broke down from overwork and could no longer work long hours. Now she barely gets by on her part-time earnings in an old apartment. Bob's company required him to move frequently, so he left home when he got his job. He was worried about his mother, who could hardly work, and sent her $1.5K every month. And it seems like nothing has changed since he transitioned into his current job. He once offered to live with his mother-in-law since his company was near her house, but she declined, saying she didn't want to intrude on her son's privacy. Indeed, even when he suddenly suggested for us to live with his mother, she refused, stating that she did not want to disrupt our newlywed life. I was taken aback by the sudden proposal, and while my husband looked downcast next to me, I was honestly relieved that she turned us down. Although I think my mother-in-law is a good person, I was a bit anxious about living with her immediately after getting married. When we returned home, I told my husband that I was upset with him, as he made a proposal without even talking to me about it first. We then agreed on discussing everything before making any decisions from there on out. I understood that my husband was just concerned about his mother, so I suggested we keep in regular contact and visit her on weekends. In addition, I spoke to my husband about increasing our financial support to her, given that we were both working after getting married, and we decided to increase it to $2K. My mother-in-law was tearful with joy, and we both put more effort into our work, hoping that she would be able to spend her old age happily after all her hardships. However, my mother-in-law's life didn't seem to be improving at all, and as the deposit day approached each month, she began to make calls demanding the money. I initially thought that she must be in trouble too, but it started to feel a bit gloomy as it continued every month. What's more, she called us without hesitation. She would say, "Have you deposited my money for this month yet?" as if she was entitled to it. While I don't think she means any harm, I felt uncomfortable with it and ended up complaining to my husband about it. "Hey, don't we get calls from your mom every month? It's a bit when she calls like that without even thanking us." "How can you be like that? Mom can't work and she's having a hard time." I guess my complaint got on his nerves. My husband unusually snapped back at me. Since then, Anytime I try to discuss our financial support for his mother, my husband becomes stubborn and the conversation leads to nowhere. Just for how long are we going to continue sending money to his mother? I feel bad, but I caught myself being upset over it. I'm sure my husband is aware of my thoughts, and that's why he's behaving this way. When I think about it, I feel like I'm a cold-hearted person and couldn't say anything more than that. About 2 years after we started sending money to her, my husband got a call from his mother. His expression was dark as he responded with, "Uh-huh," and it was clear that he was hearing bad news. "What? You've been scammed?" I was surprised by my husband's words and stood up from my chair. I thought his mother was a strong person, even though she was physically weak, and at the same time I was very concerned about how much she had lost. "Hey, what happened to your mom?" I asked my husband, who had just hung up the phone. With a dark expression, my husband began to explain. "Actually, it seems like Mom got scammed. Apparently, she got an email and when she opened the URL, it automatically registered her and demanded payment. So she paid for it." "That's a one-click fraud scam. I wonder why your mom didn't call us right away when she opened the site." At my words, my husband Bob's eyebrows raised. Perhaps I'd spoken harshly, even though I thought it was too late for regrets. "She told me that she couldn't call you because you've been cold to her recently. After worrying about it, she even borrowed money to pay it. Now she can't even pay this month's rent or water bill. She called and asked me if we could send her more money this month." With that, Bob pulled out his checkbook and began to calculate. I may have been a bit cold with her when she's called recently, but to be blamed to this extent. Anyway, we have to do something about Mom's debt. I also brought out my own checkbook and opened it next to Bob. "How much was your mom's debt?" Apparently it's $250K. We need to do something." The amount that came out of Bob's mouth left me speechless. No matter how elderly my mother-in-law is, where on earth did she borrow $250K from? She doesn't even own a house, so there's no way a bank would lend her such a large amount. If that's the case, she might have borrowed it from a sketchy source. I decided then and told Bob, "Let's pay back the debt in one installment." Bob looked at me with a start. He probably didn't expect me to suggest that. Looking into his eyes, I continued, "Because honestly, if you think about who would lend your mom such a large amount of money immediately, I can only think of non-bank lenders. If we don't pay it back quickly, the interest will just inflate the amount." Bob nodded several times as if he understood. Thankfully, having lived frugally with little desire for material possessions and having been single for a long time, we had a substantial savings. Since Bob had also saved up a decent amount, we decided to split the repayment between us. Bob thanked me many times, bowing his head. When I contacted my mother-in-law about the repayment, she thanked me over and over again on the other end of the phone. I heard her sniffling a few times, so she may have been crying. Although it's a large sum, at least we could pay back the debt for now, and she's promised to always consult us in the future, so let's let bygones be bygones. Even though I thought that, there was something that didn't quite add up. When my husband brought the money to his mother, she never revealed where she'd borrowed it. He kept saying, "Since we're the ones providing the money, we should know where it's coming from." But all she would say was, "I've forgotten the name of the company I borrowed from, but they'll come directly to collect the money, so it's okay. Thank you." He wondered, is she starting to lose her memory? Looking worried, he suggested we should take her to the hospital together sometime. However, she absolutely hates hospitals, so she stubbornly refused to go. That's why we had to plan on how to get her to go to the hospital. Around the time we'd mostly worked out the plan to take my mother-in-law to the hospital, a call came through to my husband's cell phone. The caller was Alyssa, my mother-in-law's sister, who lives in a far-off place. "Hello, Bob. It's been a while. Can we talk?" "Hello, Aunt Alyssa. It's been a long time. Yes, what's the matter?" Alyssa is my mother-in-law's older sister. She's a very responsible woman who married into a landowning family and now actively takes part in their business. She dislikes dishonesty and can be stern, but she's also very kind to her nephew Bob and me, his wife. Your mother called and asked me if she could borrow some money. Are you sending her enough each month? She seems to be struggling to pay her electric bills. We were shocked. We always make sure to send money each month and had just paid off her debt. We thanked Alyssa, then hurriedly called my mother-in-law and brought her to our house. She arrived in a disheveled state, wearing an old t-shirt, looking like she was clearly struggling financially. Mom, why did you ask Alyssa for money without telling us? I didn't ask for any money. She just asked how I was doing, so I told her that I'm not as well off as you guys, but I'm getting by. Her expression didn't seem like she was lying, so we exchanged glances. Could Alyssa have misunderstood? Maybe her complaining sounded like a plea for help. We reassured Alyssa that we were sending money to her every month. Mom, do you have other debts? Should we increase the amount we're sending? Well, she isn't really saying anything. Let's check her income and expenses next time. She might have entered into some contract we don't know about. Let's decide about increasing her support funds after that. My husband agreed with a nod. I put our checkbook, which was still out, back into the drawer, then finished up the rest of the housework. A few days later, I had to work on my day off, so we decided my husband would go to his mother's house alone. I asked him to casually bring up the topic of going to the hospital with her, then headed to work. I was swamped with troubleshooting at work, so much so that I didn't have time for lunch, but I managed to text my husband asking, "How's your mother doing?" I noticed a missed call from my husband in the evening on my way home from work. Judging by the lack of any accompanying message, I figured it must be something he wanted to discuss in person. With that in mind, I texted back, "On my way, home in 10, and hurried back. "I'm home." As I opened the front door and announced my arrival, my husband was there, standing in the foyer, his face beet red. "Sorry I couldn't take your call. How was your mother?" At my words, my husband's face went even redder, and he yelled at me. "Where's the $2,000 I send every month? Mom's all worn out." Feeling foggy from fatigue, I only managed to ask, "Did you check her bank book?" "Huh? Bank book?" My husband looked taken aback. I sighed, took off my shoes, and fetched a bank book from the living room. "Here, this is her bank book. She dropped it the last time she was here." My husband took the bank book from me and looked through it. His face went pale, and he looked up at me. "What? What is this?" "Well, that's what I'm trying to tell you." I pointed to the bank book as I explained. Not only were there transfers from my account listed in the bank book, but also transfers from another person. Moreover, all of the deposited money was immediately transferred to another account under my mother-in-law's name. My husband slumped down on the spot, clearly overwhelmed. However, he quickly got back up and looked straight at me, saying, "We should confront my mother directly." With that, he called her number, but she didn't answer. Although she usually picks up immediately, something seemed off this time. We decided to go over to her house. "Hey, my mom's mailbox is sealed shut with duct tape. Do you see it?" Upon arriving at my mother-in-law's apartment, my husband pointed out an unusual sight. No way. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as I looked at the mailbox, indeed, sealed with duct tape. What could have happened to my mother-in-law? Let's go ask the landlord. So we went to visit the landlady. The landlord, who also lives in the same apartment complex, is a friendly old lady. There, we were to learn a shocking truth. She moved to that high-rise condominium over there, didn't she? She was bragging about how her sons bought it for her. How envious. Our eyes widened in surprise. The only son my mother-in-law has is my husband, but we didn't purchase any condominium. After thanking the landlord, we decided to head over to the condominium she mentioned. The condominium was a new building and the tallest one in the neighborhood. The price of the units was exorbitantly high compared to other condos in the vicinity. How on earth could my mother afford to buy a place like this? My husband gaped at the towering building. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. Shortly thereafter, we saw a figure approaching the condominium. It was my mother-in-law. Unaware of us, she was happily humming a tune, skipping along with brand shopping bags in her hands. "Mom, what are you doing?" My husband was the first one to rush out. At first, my mother-in-law stopped in surprise but quickly continued walking towards the condominium. My husband blocked her path. Looking annoyed, she looked up at him and retorted, "What? What do you mean, what? You told us you had no money. Then how are you living in a place like this? What's with those bags? Stop nagging. You're disturbing the neighbors. Of course, no matter how much money you have, it's never enough to indulge in luxuries," she replied dismissively. Shaking, my husband somehow squeezed out a response. "Were you lying? You said you couldn't work. We thought we were helping you out of gratitude for raising me. Pam even helped. You're so noisy about money. A mother's happiness is her son's happiness. Isn't it enough that I'm happy?" Looking at my mother-in-law's snide smile, I realized she was not the person I knew. My husband must have been seeing this side of her for the first time too. He stood beside me, his face pale. My mother-in-law brushed past my stunned husband and with a casual "see ya" disappeared inside. My husband just stood there, dumbfounded. The realization that his mother, who he had cherished so much, had betrayed him was just too much to bear. I could sense his shock, and it felt like my chest was being crushed. I looked at my husband's hand and suggested, "Let's get back at her." He was taken aback at first, but after a moment, he nodded in agreement. From then on, we started planning our strategy. First, we decided to stop sending her money and begin tracking where her money was coming from. To our surprise, when we hired a detective to investigate around my mother-in-law, we discovered that she was receiving a steady sum of money each month from a certain individual. We got in touch with this person and informed him about my mother-in-law's situation. 2 weeks later, my mother-in-law called my husband. "Hey, what are you meddling in?" My mother-in-law's shouting voice came through the phone loud enough for me to hear. With a sigh, my husband responded matter-of-factly, "What do you mean by meddling? You told us that Dad found another woman and left. You told us that you couldn't get in touch with him. All lies. We heard everything from Dad." The person we contacted turned out to be my husband's father, in other words, my father-in-law. My husband and I had been told that my father-in-law was a womanizer who left for another woman and didn't even know where he was, but it turned out he was living in his ancestral home far away. The reason for the divorce was my mother-in-law's gambling problem and embezzlement. The moment my father-in-law said he was taking over the family farming business, she had brought up divorce, and he readily agreed. He had actually intended to take my husband with him, but my mother-in-law had taken him and disappeared. When he finally found where my mother-in-law and husband were, he was told that my husband despised him and didn't want to see him. Thus, to fulfill his duty as a father, he had been sending money ever since. She lied that we were living together even after I became an adult and kept demanding money from Dad. Dad was shocked. We told Dad he doesn't need to pay her anymore. Even the money he paid after I was of age, he doesn't need to ask for it back, but he should never get involved with you ever again. I could hear my mother-in-law mutter weakly, "That can't be." My husband dealt her another blow with his icy voice. "We won't be sending you money anymore either. We're going to move too, so we don't want to see you again." "How can you say that? What am I supposed to do about my living expenses? You need to repay me for the effort I put into raising you." My mother-in-law's shrill voice echoed out from the phone. With another sigh, my husband responded stoically, "I think I've repaid enough for being raised. I've been using my entire bonus for your expenses for over 15 years since I started working. From now on, I'm going to use it for my own family." My husband said that and looked at me. I could hear my mother-in-law still shouting something over the phone, but my husband calmly hung up without paying her any mind. The retaliation wasn't over with this. We began preparations for a second round. About a week after my mother-in-law called, she called again. She was clearly flustered and incoherent, but in summary, she was complaining about the sale of her condo. In fact, as we investigated, it turned out that my husband had become the guardian of his mother. Not only that, the loan for the purchase of the condo had been taken out in his name. Therefore, even though the condo was in my mother-in-law's name, it was no problem for my husband to sell it, according to the lawyer, and so we arranged to sell the condo. The condo is mine, isn't it? Why are you selling it without my permission? We bought it with our money, okay? We even checked with a lawyer, so it's legal. Still, my mother-in-law kept demanding to have the condo back. Each time, my husband reiterated that a buyer had been found and that the sale proceeds were our money. Still, my mother-in-law was far from satisfied, and from the other end of the phone, we could hear her harsh words. Unable to stand it any longer, I took over the phone from my husband. "Hello, mother-in-law. Please, stop being so stubborn. You're causing too much problems for us. The one who's in trouble is me. How dare you, Pam? I thought you were wealthy since you're older than my son, which is why I approved of you marrying Bob in the first place. But oh my lord, you're nothing but a god of pestilence." As soon as my mother-in-law shouted that, I burst into laughter. Perhaps she never expected me to laugh. My mother-in-law, who had been so loud, fell silent. I continued the conversation while laughing. "Mother-in-law, you're too careless. Setting up your son as a guardian and making him the debtor of the loan is like asking him to sell it. You're really clumsy, aren't you? Anyway, now that we can get our money back, we're just hoping we don't have to deal with you anymore." Ignoring my mother-in-law's, "Wait, hold on," on the other end of the phone, I hung up. My husband, who had been nervously watching, seemed to relax a bit when I smiled at him. 2 weeks later, my mother-in-law safely moved out of the condo, and we were informed that a new buyer had moved in. We breathed a sigh of relief when we confirmed that the sale proceeds had been successfully transferred to my husband's bank account. By the way, we felt bad about her becoming homeless, so as a severance payment, we rented the same room in the old apartment for her. So my mother-in-law's new home is her old apartment. The landlord is a nice lady but loves to gossip, so she'll probably spread all sorts of rumors. But our retaliation doesn't end here. In fact, we had another plan in progress. It was carried out as my mother-in-law moved back into her old apartment. My husband's phone fell silent after an hour of non-stop ringing. And then, about 2 hours later, one person called my husband's phone. "Hello? Yes, thank you. We appreciate your help." After my husband hung up the phone with those words, he let out a deep sigh. Then he gave me a thumbs up, a signal for all good. The person he was on the phone with was my mother-in-law's sister, Alyssa. Once we found out about my mother-in-law's incident, we immediately reached out to Alyssa. She was outraged when she learned about everything and even introduced us to a lawyer. Furthermore, she decided to keep an eye on our old apartment after we moved back. My sister may be a handful, but she used to be a sweetheart. It hurt a bit to see her like this, but after our plan was executed, Alyssa advised us to cut ties and live our lives happily. We decided to take her advice. On the day of the move, my mother-in-law did not lift a finger, even when the movers showed up. That's when Alyssa stepped in. She forcefully made my mother-in-law pack up amidst her protests. "You're all tricking my sister. I'm the victim here." Alyssa, frustrated but determined, forced her sister to return to her old apartment. Upon arrival, my mother-in-law naturally resisted, but when Alyssa threatened to ask for an immediate refund of the money she had lent, my mother-in-law reluctantly obeyed. In fact, my mother-in-law had been extorting not only my husband and me, but Alyssa as well for a large amount of money. Alyssa, not knowing any of this, had been helping her, thinking about the struggles her sister had to go through while raising her son all by herself. It's unforgivable that my mother-in-law tricked such a kind-hearted woman. Alyssa, however, has no intention of letting my mother-in-law keep the money she had lent. It seems she's made arrangements for my mother-in-law to repay her from her monthly paycheck. The amount of aid my mother-in-law received from Alyssa was considerable. It's such a hefty sum that it's doubtful whether she could repay it even if she worked her whole life. However, my mother-in-law has hardly ever worked, and even part-time jobs are hard to come by. Even when she does manage to land a job, she quits before long. Alyssa always pushes her to get back out there. Eventually, my mother-in-law ended up working part-time daily at a store owned by one of Alyssa's friends. My mother-in-law had lied about being frail and sickly, but an enforced visit to the hospital proved there was nothing wrong with her. She was told to work as much as possible. My mother-in-law, who had lied about working ever since my husband was a child while actually lazing around, was having a hard time. I heard she was already complaining on her first day. When the news of the plan's success came in, Alyssa said, laughing, "She hardly has any willpower, that one." As for us, we moved as soon as we got word from Alyssa that she had shoved my mother-in-law into her apartment. We relocated near my parents' home, a distance that now requires air travel from my mother-in-law's place. This has helped us mentally, and we're living peacefully. As we both can work remotely, there was no issue in continuing our jobs. My parents' constant presence since we moved has led to my husband bonding with my father. We had agreed that we wouldn't mind not having children, but soon after we settled down, I fell ill and found out I was pregnant at the hospital. My husband was surprised too, but now he's fascinated by our growing child with every checkup. I feel the same and promptly applied for maternity leave. We plan to take turns nurturing our child with abundant love.